Hi, welcome everyone to our Expeditions in Experiential AI seminar. And today I'm very happy to introduce Yakov Bart, who is an associate professor of marketing and a Thomas E. More faculty fellow for the Demore McKim School of Business. And he's also core faculty of the Experiential AI Institute. And also he is one of our AI faculty leaders in the institute as well. So Yakov has today he's going to talk about AI in marketing, and he has done a lot of consulting work throughout North America, Europe, and Asia. He has also won several Best Paper Awards in decision analysis and the Journal of Interactive Marketing, and he has also won outstanding teaching at Northeastern. So I give you Yakov.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you so much for coming here in person. Welcome everybody who's on Zoom. So the topic, AI's transformational impact on marketing, is of course quite huge. And when I first was asked to give an abstract for this talk 6 months ago, I was like, well, let's wait a little bit to see what's going to be kind of really more recent research I can share with you related to AI in marketing. And so for today's talk, I picked several pieces addressing kind of different stakeholders. So whether you're a researcher or whether you're a manager or public policymaker, I hope you find something interesting from my talk today. So the plan is, first, I'm going to discuss a novel framework that may help various stakeholders to better understand the impact of various AI advancements from consumer firm perspective, the framework based on the notion of digital signals. And after that, I'm going to shift gears and talk about how AI technologies help us marketing researchers to understand on how we can examine various recent initiatives on firms' behalf, increasing diversity, equity, inclusion, investing into sustainability, how we can use AI tools to measure and understand the impact of various initiative in these two domains. So specifically, I'll focus in the second half of the talk on racial diversity in advertising and how emphasizing different types of ESG factors may affect firm value and where AI comes in and help us solving or at least trying to shed some light in these research questions. So let me start with general framework. We all know that AI completely changed how consumers search for information, how consumers evaluate various products and services, and how they make purchase decisions. And of course, after the purchase, how they decide to share the experience with others. We know that algorithmic recommendations, algorithmic suggestions, algorithmic help is all around us. And so what I propose to think about anytime you say new tech development, new data development, new AI development is how you decide whether you invest into new AI development or not, based on how it helps your company better manage technology-enabled customer journey. So when I mean customer journey, what does it mean? It's something familiar for marketers, but maybe not so much outside of marketing discipline. When we analyze how consumers interact with firms, we try to divide the path through which consumers go. So this is one example prepared by one of the alliances focusing on customers, just to illustrate how typical customer journey may look like. So what we see here is that in the initial stage, as we typically in marketing focus on the path that goes through developing awareness about product and service, then considering whether you want to examine it in more detail or not, then maybe you purchase it, and then after you purchase it, you may use it. There might be some service associated with that. And of course, then you may continue purchasing, become a loyal consumer of a particular company. So as you go through the stages of interacting with company, there are various touch points. Touch points may be an advertising you may have heard on radio when you were driving an Uber. It could be some digital ad that you saw when you reading New York Times. It could be some banner ad you saw on some other side, or maybe something in the search results that moved you along this customer journey to learn more about specific product and service. And then you may start interacting with company-specific touch points. And these touch points can be both physical and digital touch points. And the consequence of the digital transformation we've been living through in the past 2 decades is that most of the touch points been shifting from primarily physical 20, 30 years ago to primarily digital, especially in the last 10, 15 years. And so, given this popularity of consumer-facing technologies, just to illustrate, the number of digital touch points has increased exponentially with Internet of Things becoming more and more prevalent in today's society. So there are forecasts that the number of Internet of Things devices is going to reach about 30 billion just in 7 years. Of course, not every single Internet of Things device is going to be focused on consumer, but about 60% actually connected with consumer-facing technology out of all Internet of Things worldwide device. So that means there's going to be a lot of different digital touch points. So what happens when we as consumers interact with these digital touch points? We leave traces, digital traces, so we call them digital signals. So every time you have any interaction with any company, whether you're aware of that interaction or not, you leave digital trace or digital signal that you emit as a consumer. And so we propose examining customer journeys through the lens of the signals emitted by consumers and how much firms actually able to act on those signals. So we define them as tangible and intangible interactions between consumers and firms that may be observable or not, depending on firms' capabilities. Your everyday behavior typically connects with a bunch of signals. You came to campus, there might be some app on your phone that became aware of the change in your location. And maybe that information has been shared by the app with other companies, or maybe not. You may be more intentional about it. For example, if you took a Lyft or Uber to a relevant campus, then you're fairly confident that the change in your location was recorded. But if you didn't, if you basically just moved with a smartphone in your pocket, or with a smartwatch, or with any other device able to track your location, you emit digital signal. And every time you search for anything online, you emit a digital signal. Anytime you make a purchase, for example, you purchase something downstairs, fortunately we have lunch in the room today, but if you had to, that transaction also, of course, is a digital. If you pay typically with a credit card or with your phone, that's digital transaction is also a digital signal. And a lot of research showing that because consumers tend to display a lot of inertia, in past behavior is fairly predictable for future behavior. Not completely, but enough to make lots of money from getting signals from your past behavior to predict future behavior. From companies who are able to personalize and target marketing efforts based on these digital signals that you emit. And so firm may want to invest into abilities to detect these digital signals as much as possible for various personalized and targeted marketing efforts. And how much they're able to do that, how much they're able to gather, analyze, and act on such data is driven by how much they invest in technology, and also, of course, driven by how much permission they're given by consumers and also by regulators, depending on the environment in which they operate. Signals may be overtly or covertly collected by firms, as we discussed, and consumers may vary in how much they know about this collection. Some consumers are very tech savvy, we call them, right? So this type of consumers are fairly well aware when the information about them collected when they interact with anything on digital devices. Most consumers are not. And so how firms interpret and act on the signals often may impact how open consumers about sharing these digital signals with one or more firms. So that's the basic framework of digital signals. Sometimes, to illustrate the point that consumers may not be aware of what's happening, you may have seen the hype recently around this device. Anybody recognize this device, Bruce?
The Humane Pen.
The Humane AI Pin. So it's something that many people have been talking about in the last few days. This New York Times covered it extensively, claiming that this is big, bold sci-fi bet on the device that comes after smartphone with lots of features. But one thing that not many people pay attention is essentially it's a device that has camera, sensors, and built-in speaker to constantly record everything in front of you. So this is not the most salient point the company makes, of course, in advertising materials, as you can imagine. And many technologies based on AI do take advantage of many consumers not being aware of the exact nature of digital signals being collected. And this is also, of course, why there's a lot of conversation about necessary regulation about what data is allowed and not allowed to be collected. And so from consumer perspective, focusing on digital signals they emit, there are several things that you need to keep in mind. One is awareness of signal emission. So surveys show that while consumers express concern about privacy, most really not aware to what extent the digital signals are collected and used for targeted marketing efforts on the firm part. Privacy concerns, of course, they're there, and a lot of research around this sort of how can companies mitigate these privacy concerns. For example, as research showing privacy concerns decrease once consumers believe they have control over their privacy, and often even perceived control is enough, as I show in one of my past research papers. Consumers may have actually trouble making informed decision about privacy due to complexity involved. So it's not like you have complete information about what information gets shared as a result of your digital interaction with your digital signal and how it gets used. The company, of course, typically firms are much more technically competent than consumers, which creates information asymmetry. And consumers also typically reluctant to switch. So every time, for example, you switch, say, smartphone, or you switch a watch, or you switch some other digital platform that you use, that's very costly, right? You're already used to some pattern interacting with your Nest device at home, with your smart doorbell, and many other sort of devices surrounding us. So changing it could be quite costly. So the switching cost involved. And also, sort of, it's important to keep in mind on the consumer side the constant privacy personalization trade. So there's this notion of privacy calculus where consumers thinking about, okay, if I'm going to sacrifice my privacy by allowing firms to collect this digital signal that I emit, how much I'm going to get in return in terms of the better personalization I get, more convenient service I get, etc. And so, of course, companies trying to make the benefits much more salient than the data collection part, which is again where regulation may come in to require companies to do it. And some of the regulations, as we know also from past research, although on paper, for example, informed consent now required for many types of collected data, but in practice, many consumers, do not pay attention to, signed privacy notices. Another thing important to keep in mind as you think about customer signals that are getting collected through this customer journey is to what degree they aggregate. So, for example, at the most detailed level, the companies, of course, would love to have the individual signal, and that becomes more and more typical. But there's also aggregated signal, right? So the data, for example, collected by satellites when you drive your car to supermarket, when you drive it to shopping mall. That information gets collected by satellites typically, that then process the data to make better forecasting of how various retail outlets are doing. But this is aggregated level. So typically that level of digital signal is not at individual level, it's on aggregate level. In the middle are the signals that are produced by consumers aggregated into segments. So the idea is that companies realize, of course, that consumers may not be happy that personal information about them get collected. On the other hand, companies do need to, of course, somehow segment consumers, something we teach in the introduction to marketing. The first thing you have to think about when you think about marketing is how you're going to segment your market. And so this discussion has resulted in companies trying to find some middle ground. So some example is Google Chrome's federated learning of cohorts, or last year they basically rebranded it Topics API, which essentially, the same thing, where basically they say, okay, we're not going to be doing cookie level collection individually of what exactly you're doing online, but we're going to basically put you very sort of simply put in various cohorts, and then we're going to allow our partners to target ads based on which cohort you get in. Of course, it's sort of very opaque and a lot of concerns about this, but yeah, this is not a privacy focused talk, so I'm not going to go too deep into that aspect today. Another aspect of consumer signals throughout the journey is visibility. So signals can be publicly observable. So when you go Instagram and post something, oh, I just went to this, fantastic. I went to Tata, I had lunch at Tata. This is observable by everybody. This is observable by Tata. This is observable by all Tata's competitors. And so Tata's competitors may decide to poach you and say, well, maybe we can offer you a better deal. We know that you like going out and grab lunch, and we know that you like to do it near Northeastern. Maybe we can send you a personalized offer, right? So what we call poaching is very common based on observable signals. So when the signal is observable, not just to the company you interact with, but when the digital signal is observable to other companies, then other companies may decide to target you in order to shift your purchases from your current company to them. And so it could be done with geolocation, could be done to geoconquesting, some of the information collected about how you change your location. The company may see, for example, you go to a Nike store and the Adidas store located nearby. They may be able to get this information in shopping mall, collected this information through beacons installed in shopping mall, and then they may target you. Or when you search online, sometimes you see that very top of your search are not the brands you're searching for, but competitors. So you can bid on competitors' keywords, and one of the other research papers that don't have time to cover today will look at the impact of this competitor poaching as a result of search results. So signal visibility could be publicly observable, in which case customer could be poached, and it could be privately observable, of course, where only the company or the platform with which you interact observes it. So for example, you read product review on Amazon. Amazon knows about that, but nobody else does, unless Amazon decides to share this information with others, right? Or if you purchase something from a specific retailer website, so only that retailer would know that you made a purchase. Although, of course, depending on what browser you use, maybe Google or Apple or some other company providing browser where you're purchasing may also get some information from that. And similar to the post-purchase stage, right? So for convenience, I'm showing several examples from 3 big stages of customer journey: pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase. Another important challenge in managing consumer relationship when we're talking about technologies such as AI, making these digital signals very obvious and observable, is focusing when companies trying to poach, acquire new prospects, and when companies try to retain customers. And another dimension here that's important to keep in mind is that consumer tendency to emit these public signals on which retention could be done, or in which this acquiring customers from competitors could be done. Consumer tendency could vary from low to high. So it could be low for some consumers, especially for signals that's hard to observe. It could be fairly high when consumers go and share information on social media. So then, sort of for consumers who often have communications with friends and family on social media, typically the tendency is higher for public signals to be emitted by this type of consumers. And so the interesting game here arises because when the other company makes decisions, should I poach that consumer or not, the decision is driven not by how easy it is to poach the consumer from my competitor, but also how much value I'm going to get from that person. Basically, if that person sending digital signals anyway, okay, maybe I'll be able to acquire that consumer today, but all my competitors are going to know about that consumer because the consumer has very high tendency to emit public signals. So is it worth my effort to even go and try to acquire that consumer? How much value would I actually get? Whereas if I get a hold of some signal from consumer with a low tendency, I say, I can leverage that signal to acquire consumer because the consumer has low tendency to emit digital signals. Other competitors are going to have hard time than poaching that consumer from me. So this sort of strategic consideration start figuring out when companies decide what type of consumers based on digital signals they emit they try to acquire, and which one they're going to decide, okay, I know we can acquire them, but it's not worth it. So this is, I think, going to be helpful to understand the trade-offs involved in that decision. And so I'm going to finish with this big framework, going through all stages of customer journey. And it's a circle because anytime, for example, you have post-purchase interaction, say you post product review on something that you did, it could be beginning of your new customer journey. So essentially, we're talking about here about the network of customer journeys. So in the inner circle, there are actions of consumer or firms. And so it starts with consumers emitting signals with different degrees of observability. Firm decides whether to invest in technology to acquire these digital signals. And then if it does acquire, what should it do? Should it try to approach that consumer? And then how consumer would react? For example, if consumer did not realize that the digital signal was emitted, and then you get some personalized offer from company, the consumer may be taken aback. Consumer may be very surprised. So the psychological element was like, well, I didn't realize, this information was shared. I didn't realize the digital signal went out there. And so the companies have to be careful when they act based on that information. And also when companies, even if companies were allowed to collect as much information about you as possible, even if we didn't have regulation, in practice, what would happen is that consumers would then stop believing the communication from companies because they said, well, you know everything about me. How can I trust that you actually offer some personalized? So for example, you get an offer for, some, for example, wonderful shirt that you've been looking a long time, and the company says, we have exactly the shirt you've been looking for. And you're like, well, but can I trust you? Maybe you just want me to go click some buttons because maybe you're just exaggerating what you have. So there's also considerations if the company has too much information from digital signals consumers emit, maybe the credibility goes down. And so this sort of goes into what economists call cheap talk consideration, and one of the other works that I've done before to show that effect. So this framework shows the actions of consumer and firms and factors influence the actions on the outer circle. And so when you're thinking about, well, how, for example, as a manager or as a consumer, I should approach adopting some technology or not, how should I think about acquiring digital signals or emitting digital signals? I hope this framework would be useful. It provides a lot of opportunities for future research. If you're a researcher watching this related to signal generation by consumers from response to signals, consumer reactions, and that since that paper is published, I invite you to read more about this. It's been fairly popular with more than 22,000 basically accesses, as I just saw online from the Journal of Academy of Marketing Science. So that's the framework. And in the second half of the talk, I want to shift the gears, as I mentioned, and talk about how AI technologies can help us answer some really important questions that arose fairly recently. One of these questions is, well, we know that diversity, equity, inclusion become important. I'm sure you read many articles about the rise of the inclusive consumer, that it's really important for consumers that the firm has values aligned with diversity, equity, inclusion. This is an example from McKinsey. You can see tons of this article published by a lot of consultancies, agencies, etc. And so what I'd like to discuss with you is, well, is it true? Do consumers actually care? So I'm going to talk about the impact of diversity in TV advertising on consumer purchase intentions. So the motivation is clear. We know that consumers demand societal change and increased diversity. We know that brands are responding. That part is clear. And one of the ways for brands to respond to this demand from consumers is to use various visual marketing, which seems a fantastic proposition. So visual communication of brands features more diversion, equity, inclusion. Consumers love it. It promotes societal change. It's a win-win, right? Well, that's one of the questions that we're going to address, because there are concerns that if this visual communications featuring diversity are not perceived as authentic, there are, of course, considerations related to woke-washing, tokenism that's been raised before. So maybe it's not so simple. Maybe increasing diversity in your communication does not immediately make consumers rush into stores to buy a product. And this is the question that we focus on here. So we examine specifically TV ads as a very common and powerful engine of visual marketing communication for many brands, and how racial diversity in TV ads impact consumer purchase intention. We focus on moderating the role of two factors. One is how much attention consumer pay to the ad, because we know what kind of ads been watched fully and what kind of ads were not watched very carefully. Consumers switched off in the middle. And the second factor we're going to see what it matters is how much public attention to racial inequality is, because we know that based on various events, the public attention to racial inequality goes up and down, unfortunately, but there's a lot of evidence for that. And so we analyzed change in consumer response to racial diversity before and after George Floyd's murder in May 2020. So data collection. We have thousands of ad creative from hundreds of brands over the course of 3.5 years. So we have details on viewer engagement metrics, whether the ads was watched, what percentage of the ads was basically watched. And then we also have the data on consumer purchase intention. I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the data when describing how we operationalize things. So the AI tool come handy, specifically computer vision tool come handy to operationalize racial diversity, because of course, sitting down and manually watching tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands TV ads, and then manually basically classify, okay, is it diverse yet, is it not? It's just not possible, and this is where AI computer vision helps us. So we use solutions developed by computer vision researchers to detect faces in TV ads, and then we identify and classify actors based on race using some of the data sets developed for the purpose by computer scientists. So just to illustrate, basically, we take the ad, we divide it into frames, and then sort of that gives us images, collection of images associated with each TV ad. And then we say, okay, what percentage of faces in the ad are of certain race? For example, the Black actor share of ads. And we calculated at the brand level for every day the brand had any ads aired on TV in this country. And so, for example, 2 white faces, 1 black face, we say the Black actor share of ads, I'm going to refer to it as Brasil, is 33%. So we looked at what's happening with overall diversity in TV ads first, over all industries, over all brands. And what you see here is, again, the percentage of white actors, percentage of Black actors, Asian actors, other race actors, before and after George Floyd murder. So we see that quite fast after George Floyd's murder and associated social protest in many cities in this country, the percentage of white actors went down, the blue line, and the percentage of Black actors went up. But then this effect was not sort of very long-lived, and then it's sort of, you can see reversal to the mean, even within a year from George Floyd's murder, and we're now collecting a little bit more data from the company to see what's been happening in the last year and a half. Another interesting question here that we show in a paper focusing on innovation is, what brands, is it true that some brands decide to implement high diversity in digital communications faster and some brands slower? So we use the framework of diffusion. For example, when company introduce new product to market, some people, innovators, early adopters, get on this right away. They line up in front of Apple stores to get the new model of iPhones. Some people wait and adopt it later. So this innovation diffusion framework can be applied to social innovation diffusion as well. So if we consider diversity as a social innovation that brands may want to adopt in order to appeal to consumers, then maybe some brands adopt the social innovation, adopt more diversity in ads faster than others. And indeed, that turns out to be true. So we did this analysis based on time trends in fast food industry, and turns out that some brands leaders, some brands early adopters, some late adopters, and some are laggards. So basically, we using time series data, we can see sort of which brands follow other brands in increasing diversity in advertising over time. So some brands leading it, some brands are following, and I think that's also important information for consumers and regulators. Coming back to the purchase intention. So as I mentioned, we measure purchase intention using Yakov's brand index tool. And so the idea here is that we work with a partner who collects daily surveys on hundreds of brands, asking people how likely you are to purchase a brand. So purchase intention is a well-known proxy for consumer behavior. I'm not saying that every time you say I want to purchase a brand, you're going to end up purchasing it, but the correlation is fairly high, has been shown in multiple prior studies. And so we take daily mean of purchase intention as our measure of purchase intention here. As far as consumer processing goes, we measure ad zapping or turning off TV using attention tuning rate. Again, sort of that data comes from our partner. So our operationalization is what percentage of consumers watched at least 75% of the ad. So if on average more than 75% of the ad was watched, then we say that consumers carefully attended to the ad, they paid attention. Otherwise, they didn't pay much attention. So we use the elaboration likelihood model framework that in psychology been established about 45 years ago, a very well-established theory that says that it matters when you fully attend to information, when you're motivated to process information in front of you, such to the ad, then your central processing may look different than your peripheral processing. If you don't really pay much attention, if you just, so maybe a little bit of the ad and then you switched off. And turns out, as we see in the result, that it matters whether consumers process the ads that are racially diverse centrally or peripherally. And so that's our conceptual model. We look at the effect of diversity in TV advertising on consumer purchase intention. It's mediated by viewer intention, and we see that the results change before and after George Floyd's murder. So we look at the results before George Floyd's murder, and I'm going to fairly quickly go through, the model for the purpose of this talk. We use dynamic panel data, our bond estimation, and then we look at the impact of murder of George Floyd. So in our model, we look first at interaction between Black actor share advertising and attention. And then in the second model, we add the interaction with whether it happened before or after George Floyd's murder. And then we did estimation robustness checks. The results are the following. We see that indeed the effect of racial diversity on purchase intention depends on whether consumers process it peripherally or centrally. If consumers process peripherally, watched a little bit of an ad, we see positive and significant effect on consumer purchase intention, but the effect becomes negative if consumers purchase it more carefully. And so we looked at what's happening before and after George Floyd. So GF0 is before George Floyd's murder, GF1, the orange lines show the marginal effects here after. And so we see that overall shift down. So overall, the impact of racial diversity on consumer purchase intention went down after the murder of George Floyd, but it still matters whether consumers process it peripherally or they process it centrally. So the key takeaways here is that in the context, it matters with the context, and it matters whether consumers pay attention or not. So before George Floyd, the effect of diversity as measured by Black actor share is positive and significant when processing is more peripheral, and insignificant when processing is more central. While after George Floyd's murder, the purchase intention is negative and significant when processing is central, when consumers pay attention. And we can discuss if we have time in Q&A why that might be the case and non-existent otherwise. So the next step for this research project is to use computer vision tools to understand more well. There are different Black actors. Maybe the effects differ depending on how popular Black actors are. So we currently try to identify which Black actors appear in the ads and does it matter, and what roles they play. Do they play a central role in the ad, or they play kind of supporting role in the ad? Are they in the center of the image, or are they kind of in the peripheral of the image? We're thinking about collaborating with other faculty at the Institute, focusing on computer vision to analyze poses in which actors act in the ads and see if that matters as well. So that's for this project, and we can discuss in Q&A. Of course, happy to check more about this. The paper, the working paper is out there, available. You can download and read it. The final piece I'd like to share with you is the piece focused on concerns around ESG, environmental social governance. Many of you know what this letter stands for: environmental, what a company benefits or harm the environment. Social, how company interacts with its employees and broader community. And governance is how good is the governance model, how company aligns stakeholder interests to drive sustained business growth. So the dilemma that many top managers face is very simple. On one hand, you have investors demanding that companies prioritize ESG-related concerns and expand disclosures, right? However, studies show that investing in ESG not necessarily paying off. So investors are reluctant to sacrifice this financial performance. On one hand, of course, we all want to save polar bears and make sure they're still with us and with our children. However, it may be costing too much. And so the question here is, well, can we figure out the way to quantify how much emphasis companies put on ESG and then see how that emphasis then impacts the firm value? And again, here where AI helps us, specifically natural language processing, because sure, I can sit down and read all documents coming from companies, specifically conference earning calls, where companies that are traded publicly require to disclose information. I can see it, read it all, code, whether they discuss more or less ESG, but it's completely impractical. Fortunately, we can use natural language processing to help us with that. And so we used one of the version of Bart model trained on sustainable investing text corpus. And we extract the presence of 26 ESG factors from over 10 million sentences in a conference called Transcripts, covering more than 6,000 firms represented across multiple industries over the course of 16 years. And so now that we have this tool to quantify, then the next question, well, there are different types of ESG emphasis. It could be material and non-material. So what does it mean? The definition is that if emission from corporate disclosure would substantially change the mix of information available to reasonable investor, we call it material. If it's not, it's non-material. It's not up to us what counts material and non-material. Of course, we're talking about publicly traded companies, so there's a Sustainability Accounting Standards Board that regulates, depending on which industry a company is in, what counts as material and what's not. If you're an airline, then emission is definitely going to be something that's very material for you. Other things may be less so according to SASB. If you're in telco, then things like custom privacy and data security are deemed to be material for your business model. Some of the other ESG factors are deemed to be non-material. And so once we code everything, we can see how much firms emphasize material and non-material ESG factors over time. And we see that there's a spike in non-material ESG emphasis. Guess what happened in 2020? Stakeholder capitalism arrives to Davos, big letter signed by most CEOs saying we're shifting from shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And of course, it's reflected in firm communications. The tool allows to look at specific companies. Some companies, material emphasis and non-material emphasis very close to each other. For some companies like Bank of America, material emphasis was higher, now it's lower. And we see some phase validity based on some CEO statements and some concerns, right? So lately, Republicans politicians argue that Bank of America prioritizes non-material ESG over shareholder returns. And this is what we see in our data. Indeed, for that company, the non-material ESG emphasis substantially increased. And so in terms of the emphasis on cost, sort of the key idea here is that, well, you invest in emphasizing ESG, it costs you something. So the investors want to see, well, how are you going to recoup these costs? And so investors looking for signals to see if firms able to mitigate or recover these costs. And so what happens here is we've been thinking about it. Why would the firm want to invest and emphasize non-material ESG? Well, because it's not just investors. The firm has many different stakeholders demanding company to speak on various ESG issues. And the common thinking used to be, well, okay, we just do that. We talk about this non-material ESG. What's the worst can happen? The other stakeholders are happy. The investors probably not going to care much. That's kind of how common wisdom been going up until we did this research. And it turns out that It's not the case. So non-material ESG is not really non-material because emphasizing non-material ESG sends a negative signal signifying potential cost disadvantages, resource allocation inefficiencies, and potential managerial distraction. And so when we ran the model, we found that emphasizing non-material ESG decreases firm value substantially more than emphasizing material ESG increases it. This negative effect of emphasizing non-material ESG increases over time, and it's even stronger in regulated industries. We wanted to illustrate this point. We built a web app called ESG Emphasis Finder. In this app, you can put any company and see how much this company been emphasizing material versus non-material ESG over time. And so we invite you, if you have a camera on your phone, you can grab it right now. Otherwise, you can shoot me an email. I'll be happy to share you with the link. The paper is also available for everybody to read on SSRN. And of course, I welcome everybody to come and read it. And this is all I wanted to share with you today. So I think we can switch to the Q&A portion.
Thank you so much, Yakov. Any questions from the audience before we go to the online questions? Yes.
Yes, Sheila Puffer, International Business and Strategy Group. Hi, everybody. Fascinating. We're just with regard to the marketing one, in the dependent variable, what was the race of the people? Was it, you must have investigated
Or the other actors?
as your dependent variable? No, not the actors, the dependent variable.
Oh, so what consumers? Yeah. So it's a representative national panel. So we averaged representative national panel. So I think one potential interesting question could be asked, I think this is where you're going, is whether the racial diversity affect consumers depending on what race they are. That's a really interesting question. Unfortunately, we do not have this data. We only have the national representative data. So we have the average effect on consumer purchase intent, but we cannot dive in because, well, again, not all consumers willing to share these digital signals and the data. We may potentially have some way to dig into this using some more granular data we may have at the DMA level, and one of the projects may actually be addressing that. So because, depending on which city you live in, right, it correlates with racial composition. So again, we're not going to be able to perfectly answer this question, but maybe we can answer it more precisely.
Can you do it, can you create, or are you willing to create an experiment to investigate that?
Oh, absolutely. The problem, anytime you put the person in the lab to assess advertising effectiveness, the person knows that, oh, I'm in the lab, people show me diverse ads, and there is what we call social desirability bias. And so what people tell you about whether they're impressed by your ad or not in the lab may not be how they're actually going to react in the lab in the everyday life when there are no researchers looking over your shoulder.
But Blacks may react differently. That
Potentially, yes.
Desirability could be just something that's controlled for a sense.
Potentially, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then look at the,
Yeah,
right? So I think experimentation would be fantastic too.
Yeah, would be very interesting. I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Here, okay, go ahead.
No, I don't want to-
There's one question online. But you go ahead.
Is this open access? This
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
ESG? My sister's in the investment business and she's looking for things like this. And so this tool is.
We should bring the commercial officer from Northeastern here.
Yeah, I know.
I'm serious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so I'll be sending that to her today.
Thank you.
And
We're trying to increase the impact, so of course,
Yeah.
the tool is up and running, absolutely.
And Eric, there's a question online. Maybe you can ask it.
Yeah, question is, are there any findings any findings on effect by customer demographics?
Are there any findings on the effects of consumer demographic? I'm looking at the question for the audience online. It's probably similar to the question that Sheila has asked. It probably relates to the racial diversity research. And the answer is that we have only nationwide average data. But as we just discussed, it would be interesting to see if that potentially could be answered with more granular data, at least at the level of the state or the city level response on the consumer purchase intention question in the panel.
Are there questions from the audience? Other questions? Sheila, again,
Well,
I mean, it is great actually, because then there's lots of, it's amazing interaction. Go ahead.
Well, I've worked on ESG myself in different areas, as some of you know. In any case, only old people watch TV. And I noticed, I'm an old person and I watch TV every night, and from 11 till midnight. And I saw the jump in blacks being portrayed, right? And I don't know, is there a way of looking at TV viewers somehow and looking at the racial distribution and the old people versus the young people? Just dig a little deeper into.
That's a great question. I mean, of course, yeah, I'm trying to think like how much data there is that, sort of this suggestion that only old people watch TV. I think sort of this is, part of it is of this, stereotype. I mean, it's grossly underestimated commonly how much TV people watch on average in this country still. I don't know if anybody want to guess how much TV average American watches every day?
People are on their devices 7 hours a day.
Even though
Just sitting at a TV.
in front of TV. Well, sitting or not, we don't know, but
You mean not
TV
on
is on-
demand? Because
no.
everyone does on demand.
4 hours.
Well, yeah, so Bruce knows the number from, because Bruce is marketing professor. Exactly. So, but it's 4 hours daily. That's the average number. How many of you watch TV 4 hours daily? I would be very surprised, right? And so, we live in a very diverse country. And so I think maybe, sort of in certain areas like Boston, maybe it's older people primarily watching TV. I'm not sure if it's true for the whole country. I don't have the data handy, but yeah, I think that's something interesting to check. I would agree.
Yes, go ahead.
Bruce Clark, the marketing professor. So in the advertising study, you're classifying actors based on their race. And it would be noise in the data, but I'm curious about how you handle that black is not binary. And in fact, it can be racially ambiguous and sometimes intentionally so, who this person is. How does that affect what you find as far as you can tell?
So we set the confidence threshold, right? So typically as computer vision model on face recognition, they come with a confidence level of recognition. And so we set fairly high bar. I don't remember, it's like 0.9 or 0.95%. And what's interesting, and actually that's one of the reasons one of the reasons, of course, we focused on black sheriff actors because of the effect of George Floyd, because we thought it would be mostly pronounced, of course, for that case, but also turns out that for other races, computer vision in terms of face recognition are not as precise. So turns out that white and black are two races that are most precisely identified by computer vision methods at the moment. The other races are less precise. Again, there's some technical explanation related to that, but that's basically the fact, and that's why I focused on another reason why I focused on black share offense for this research.
Other questions?
One more question.
Yes,
One more
Larry.
question. This is from Jimmy from the room. He's listening in. So his question is, in your panel data model, what is the target variable? Purchase, not purchase?
It's consumer purchasing intentions. So it's not the actual purchase, but in the nationwide survey, YouGov measures by doing surveys on what's the likelihood that you purchase a brand, what's your intention to purchase the brand. And so this is not as precise as the actual purchase, but we know there's fairly high correlation between consumer purchase intention and consumer purchases, which is why we're fairly confident that this is going to translate down the line into purchases as well. Thank you for the question.
Regarding privacy, are there regulations for protecting customer privacy in the way that companies are using our data?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, the conversation that we've been having for a number of years now. Inspired, by Cambridge Analytica, probably. That was the biggest kind of lift in awareness of public and how much data is collected and shared by companies that Americans interact with every day. And not just, of course, in this country, but the discussion in this country, I think, was quite substantial. Discussion prior to started then, because, again, different countries treat privacy very differently from legal standpoint, right? Some countries treat it, closed as a right. It's not the case in this country, which is why the legislation is lagging. I mean, we still do not have federal laws around privacy. Several states in this country have privacy laws. So I think California was the first state implementing privacy laws similar to European initiative, commonly referred to as GDPR on data privacy regulation. New York, I think a few other states joined since then. But the problem with privacy regulations typically, and you may see that it's actually big tech companies often lobby for more privacy regulation, just like it's big tech lobbying for more AI regulation. They already have data about you. So the more regulation they can introduce, the harder it will be for new companies to get data to compete with them. And so this is a fine line between regulating big tech and putting onerous regulations on what can and cannot be collected, so that it would restrict competition and lock down monopoly of the current big tech companies. So this is very much ongoing conversation, which is going to be continue, I think, to be very much the focus of the current administration, and hopefully it's going to continue, depending, of course, on how things are going to go politically. But I think it's definitely a very important topic, and there's no easy answer on what's sort of the correct, right? So the reasonable people disagree on what's the right privacy regulation regime would be, to make sure that people do not suffer from invading privacy, but also that we have healthy competition going on without looking the current situation where some big tech companies, some would argue, have power close to monopoly.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes.
Would you think, Yakov, I just saw that for your ESG materiality paper, that your data were collected from 2005 to 2021. What kind of trends did you see there? Because there's going to be a lot more disclosure over time, right?
So the overall trend is the following, right? So this is across all companies.
Yeah.
So basically, I think sort of this jump, as I mentioned, this is across all companies, right? So companies said, well, this stakeholder capitalism is here, so we're going to talk about it in our earnings calls, because we need to address the needs of other stakeholders. What's going to happen after that? Of course, it's hard to say, because again, sort of speaking of regulation, as we know, Republican lawmakers try to restrict the ability of using basically ESG information for investment. It's very much kind of ongoing debate. How much sort of the companies basically what the company should be required to disclose ESG metrics. There are a lot of different ESG metrics. This is just one of the metrics based on conference earnings calls. There are other metrics many consultants focus on collecting and sharing with investors. So the regulation is needed on what needs to be disclosed. And I think depending on how the regulation goes, the firm decision on emphasizing or not material, non-material may change depending on the mandatory disclosure regime we're going to arrive to. So I think that's going to be another big kind of point to watch in the future, when mandatory disclosure of ESG becomes part of the regime in this country. Then, of course, I think companies will have to take another careful look about how they think about emphasizing material versus non-material.
So we have 1 minute left. Maybe can you give us like a closing remarks or what you want to see next?
Sure. I mean, I guess there are two things. One is we need to continue understanding how AI developments impact consumers, impact firms, and we already have some frameworks developed around new technologies impact that could be applied to AI developments, and what I shared in the first half may be useful. But also, the good thing is that AI tools developed by our colleagues in engineering and computer science really help business researchers to address the problems that we couldn't even dare to examine before, because the manual data collection that would be required to pull off any of the two projects I described is just completely infeasible. And fortunately, new advances in natural language processing and computer vision allow us to keep companies more and more accountable and examine the consequences of companies changing something in the communication, be it text communication, visual communication, video communication, on how various stakeholders react to that. So I think there's going to be a lot of new exciting research coming up.
So thank you again, Yakov, and thank you everyone for joining us online and those in person. But